All right, everyone, and welcome back to another video on Kaiju number 8. My name is D-Free, and today we have some fun stuff. I did quite a lot of testing today, and I took a lot, and I mean a lot of numbers in a lot of different situations. And today we'll talk about Kikoru and her value overall to the team. One of the things you've heard me say while this struggles to load is the value of Kikoru when she's applying her defense down, and then also factoring in the fact that she herself can do some solid damage too. I realize I got two musics on, my bad. Let me turn that other one off in a second here. Give me my mouse back. Or no, I don't. I don't know why it's not picking up the game audio. Okay, whatever. I hear the game audio, but it's not recording. It's fine. So anyway, yeah, like the value of Kikoru individually. I pretty early on made the assessment that she's a sub DPS character because she doesn't hit hard enough to be your primary when the primary is far and away Hoshina. Now, the caveat is maybe you don't have Hoshina. And if you don't have Hoshina, her numbers are much more normal, right? They're not, she's not doing more damage on average than a lot of characters, but she does apply the defense down. And so that's more or less one of the things that I wanted to talk about in today's video. Now, a couple of quick qualifiers here. I was playing against the Kaiju number 10 stage here, and I did it in a bunch of different variations. For example, I have test numbers with just base Hoshina, where he's critting, where he's no critting. I have test numbers with Hoshina with Kikoru's 15% ultimate defense down. Yes, she has a stronger one on her normal attack, but the ultimate defense down. I've got situations where I've got Ryo in there with just Hoshina and getting the attack increase from Ryo's passive, plus the extra 10% from his other passive that he gets. I've got test showcases where I've got Chester in there and in a similar situation where he's applying his support skill and we're getting that 882 extra attack with this current setup. And that's spreading the Hoshina and how much damage Hoshina is doing with that flat gain. I've got Ashiro. I've got numbers for everything and every combination. And then I've got the characters grouped together. As you see, this was the final test I was running just to see what this looked like. And I also, because I'm not great at math, admittedly, employed Google Gemini, an AI, to help me with all my numbers and come to the conclusions. So ultimately, the general consensus that was reached was that if you are trying to reach a single highest hitting team output, then that team does... Wow, this is very different than what was on my phone. It's not even the same team that I was just in with the game. That's funny. The single hardest hitting team in the game, I'd say, because nobody else would perform better than Hoshina, is going to be this exact team right here. That is the single hardest hitting team in the game. Now, there are some qualifiers. The AI was trying to get me to drop Ashiro in favor of Kikoru because what it wanted to do was it wanted to have all these different types of buffs stacking. So, for example, you're getting crit damage from Buddy Hoshina's passive. You're getting crit rate from Buddy Hoshina with his dupe, his first dupe. There's a couple other things in there like speed and stuff like that that you obviously can consider, but I didn't factor that into my testing. Anyway, you're getting the flat attack increase from Chester, right, which is massive, right? So there's that. And then also, Chester applies damage dealt once every few turns, basically, on his ultimate. He also, when he gets that first dupe, automatically just applies a 30% increase as well. Buddy Hoshina, by the way, also is doing that, his combat skill, giving 65%, give or take, to whatever character you're selecting, which is pretty valuable. And then Kikoru is doing her defense down while also having her own damage output, which in a setup where she's getting the support from Chester, it was doing roughly 20k damage to, you saw her attack a second ago, it was like 12 or whatever thousand. Chester's making up the difference, and it's closer to like 19 to 20. Anyway, so we're getting that, but the defense down was only valued at about 5.28% damage increase, which is actually the weakest damage increase out of all of these different types of buffs. But the AI really wanted me to stack all these different kinds of buffs as opposed to like saying, for example, Chester plus Ryo plus Buddy Hoshina and making it work that way, because based on the calculations, that didn't seem like the most optimal outcome. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And so like I was saying, if you want to reach a single hitting outcome, then this is it. And part of the reason why is because Ashiro offers discreet encouragement. Ashiro also offers the morale boost. So that's an attack increase and a damage dealt increase. Really, the consensus is it was also what we also came to the conclusion of, is that with or without dupes, but it's certainly with dupes, Chester is far and away the best support character in the game because the stat numbers are just so low. Like 2,900 is not a high number. Like games have attack stats that are far higher than that, right? And so as a result, him pushing out basically 900, and he can go higher than that, but in my testing, it was about 900. He was able to far and away provide the biggest damage dealt increase buffs, and a lot of variance too. Whenever we were doing this, one thing that happened was there was not a lot of variance. Like if I showed you my testing, I had numbers that were really just not even a single digit variance. So for example, I'm looking at my phone. Base normal attack from Hoshina. By the way, I was only doing the normal attack on Kaiju 10 with Hoshina, and that's it. His base was doing 1911. Like, if I go in right now with none of that, you'd probably see that. His base was doing 1911. And I did that repeatedly, every single time. And then with a crit, it was always 5736. And then with Kikoru's defense down, that 1911 turned to 2112. Or no, 2012, excuse me. And then with critical, with Kikoru's defense down, that changed to 6300. So, like, there's a modest increase there from just the base number. I don't know why this is breaking, but there's a modest increase from just the base number. But I don't have my phone plugged in, of course, so I can't really show you that. But it's not anything insane. But when we started to plug in other characters, then this stuff got much better. For example, the base damage with Ashiro's morale boost, not even the discreet encouragement, went from 1911, just base for Hoshina by himself, to 2,700. That actually outperformed Kikoru as well at 2,100. There's basically 2012. Excuse me. There's like a 700 damage increase from just Ashiro's one effect over Kikoru's 15% defense down, and so obviously that adds up as you go through. And so ultimately, we also, the AI and I came to the conclusion that the game pretty much multiplies all this stuff, which is why it was trying to force me to use Kikoru in the final slot. The one situation where Kikoru wound up being very valuable, however, she was also particularly valuable before I plugged in Buddy Hoshina. He was the last character I plugged in because I knew he would shift it so much, because he just does so much specific buffs. Anyway, before he was plugged in, sure, but otherwise, on a total damage output setup, you remember I was talking about how if your goal is to just showcase one big hit, right, then that was the team. If your goal is consistent overall damage output, Kikoru winds up being better in that slot. Now, here's the caveat to that. I did not test Reno, for example. There could be other DPSs that are better, but with Kikoru and the other support characters, which is how I considered her in this video, she wound up being the best fourth character on that team, and that team consisted of her, both Hoshinas, and Chester. Because Chester, again, is a staple. And this really summarizes the overall assessment for these characters that I initially had. And that's that Chester is the primary star of the show. Chester is the character you want to get. With no dupes, he's fine. With two dupes, he's ridiculous. But I didn't even consider the defense penetration up. I only considered even the first dupe, and he still is far and away the best character out of all these because he is able to do that. And another thing that is a point with these characters is their own individual utility. For one, all these support characters do nearly no damage. That's why Kikoru was valued pretty highly, because she's applying the defense down for everyone, and then also these characters are not doing very much damage individually themselves. And then also the selective nature of their skills. Like, she's only really buffing one character. And that's where, again, Chester comes in. He's the best damage dealer out of all that grouping of support characters specifically. And then he buffs everybody, right? Just so, like, that's, again, where he pops in. He's a upgraded version of Rio. And so Rio, as a result, as I plugged in more and more characters, this doesn't account for Rio's last passive, because I didn't want to account for this because it's the 6th freaking passive. And I also doesn't account for the speed. Right, he's going to be able to give speed out as well on the ultimate. It's just a little bit too much to try to plug all that stuff in and come to a decision on how the game handles all that stuff. And I had already been calculating this for like an hour plus, and it was pretty annoying. Anyway, but Rio got really suppressed, particularly once I plugged in Ashiro's discreet encouragement. Rio basically got eliminated from the list. And so the overall assessment on support characters is as follows. It's a 1A, 1B here. Ironically, it's a 1A, 1B. I kind of buried the lead by saying Chester is the best, because I do think he is the one I would choose as the better character forced to do it, because he buffs everybody, right? But Buddy Hoshina's buffs are just so significant to one character, his buddy, that, like, you can't disregard it. I mean, he's literally buffing this characters in so many ways. For example, I didn't consider all this stuff. This wasn't a part of my calculation because I knew it was in here, and I know everyone, like I was mentioning with Rio, may or may not have these dupes in here. But just for example, follow-up skill damage plus 25% to the ally. That's going to be the strongest character on your team. So they're going to get 25% more follow-up damage. They're going to get 20% crit rate. They're going to get the buddy's ultimate gauge goes up after he uses an ultimate. Just for some reason, he increases their ultimate gauge. After the buddy defeats a kaiju, he gets a speed bonus. This one gets a speed bonus, which is pretty good, so he can get going faster again, of course. His passive increases the buddy's crit damage if your SP is low. I kind of forget that he does this, to be honest. So you've got to like line him up with low SP, but that's 44 and it could go up another few levels. So that's probably about 50 at cap. Crit damage for the buddy for 2 turns plus 50 is ridiculous, especially when that buddy is numbers 10 Hoshina, who's going to just nuke, right? Moving on. There's a speed increase in here. That's good for the buddy, but again, wasn't really factored into my testing. But this also, 62% increase to single target and blast attack. For the record, this is the single best damage dealt buff out of everything that I calculated. Maybe there could be some variance with skill levels I'd have to go through and check, but this also applies to literally like everything except for a character's ultimate, because the character is either going to have a single target attack or a blast attack, unless they're one of the rare characters that actually has an AoE modifier. So yeah, this is literally going to apply to most of the characters. So very versatile, very versatile. Excuse me. And this one does not have to be on the battle buddy. So there's a selective nature to that. Like you could put that on whoever you want. It could be Kikoru if she's on the team. He applies a speed to himself, but this one right here, the unit and the battle bunny's units attack for their normal attack goes up. So I keep saying bunny. Battle buddy gets the normal attack damage. So normal attack damage, follow-up damage, crit rate, crit damage. Like and then single target / blast attack, whichever you're doing. He's just ridiculous. So there's that. But again, Chester is the king otherwise. And so I would choose Chester 9 times out of 10. But that's because I want my other characters to be good. So ultimately, this is where the crossroads are. Do you want to hyper buff one character? In this case, that'd be Hoshina. But really, we can apply this formula really to anything. And the funny thing is the AI came to the same conclusion that we already mostly did, that the best team is like 3 supports in Hoshina, something like that. You know, you could put anybody else in that spot, though. I could put Kikoru there with 3 supports. You could put the other Kikoru there with 3 supports. You could put anybody, and they will get their highest overall damage output with that setting, right? There's just so many variables also, like the individual weapons. I consider them too. There's just so many variables here when it comes to this that it's just kind of hard to really keep track of. But you could put anybody in that single buff slot. Do you want to run a team like that, or do you want to have a team that consistently outputs the most damage possible, right? And that's where, again, Kikoru can slide in, or another character like Reno. I really think it's either Reno or Gen that would slide into that spot more effectively. Like if there's going to be somebody else on that total damage output, as it was calling it TDO, had never heard that term. But if it's going to be one of those characters in that slot, I bet it's one of these two as opposed to Kikoru, just because of the efficiency. And another thing that would make me lean Gen's way, he's pretty fast, but otherwise, he actually also has the double plates. So, like, it's technically 3 plates because he hits the physical plate too, while she only has 2. And so he's much more efficient at breaking. And you don't need breaking for your Hoshina single target, but he would do more damage if you break. So there's that. And then another thing that happens with Chester and with Reno, and this is where they could get fun, is if you put them together, they have an effect in here where after the allies attack, they're doing extra tip damage. This is another thing that was factored into Chester as well, is that he's constantly pushing more damage with field ops, right? Deals shot damage, deals ice shot damage here. Or ice damage additional. I'd have to imagine these can proc at the same time. I did not try it. I'd have to imagine they can, though, because why not? We can try it here live. But there's just so many different variables to it. But just the general consensus on this, or final analysis, whatever, was that overall, those are the best supports. And then the third best one would be Ashuro. And then technically Kikoru is slated higher than Rio, but I guess Rio is a dedicated support, so there's that. It's just that those support characters themselves do no damage, and that's where they really, really fall by the wayside. But if the value is just pure defense down, that is, in my opinion, something you can kind of do without. But the attack increases from Ashuro, from Chester, make Rio pretty redundant. Now, the caveat is Rio is a full team attack buffer, like, and that also extends to Chester. He's got some really interesting synergy with Chester. You see, like, I spent all day feeding all this information, not really all day, but like a couple hours feeding all this information, all these calculations, all these different comebacks and retorts to my Gemini AI to figure all this stuff out for me. And I agreed with what it was saying, though. So I spent a while trying to figure that out. So I believe that's worth a like and a sub if you haven't already. Anyway, so we were going to see the damage here. Let me turn this down. The condition for this is after activating a combat, follow-up, or ultimate against a kaiju in the ice crystal state. So I have to put them in ice crystal, which is applies. Okay, so combat skill. At the start of the wave, applies ice crystal. That is the same as passive to all kaijus, though. He's already got that. Okay, so they've got that after an ally attack. So that's going to proc right now. It should proc right now, right? Chester has to use his combat skill to trigger field ops. Did I do that? I did that, right? Or is he just slow? No, I did it. I was going to say, he shouldn't be that slow. So right here, we should see both. There was the ice. There was a few things stacked. It was kind of hard to see it, but I did see the ice one. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see it. It's stacked pretty on there. But for sure I saw the ice damage. They're still in ice crystal state. Let's see if we can see it this time again. 488. I'm not sure it's doing it. Somebody pause it and let me know. I would assume, though, that it does because they're just different things. Maybe an easier way to tell would be to because I believe that the shot damage one is like gray or whatever. The easier way to tell would be if I put like Tay in there or something, like an actual like DOT other character. No, it wouldn't matter. I don't know. Anyway, but these characters were also adding extra overall damage across the board over time with that extra chip damage. So like that matters too. So there's quite a lot of things to consider into this. If you want to read the thread that I did with my AI, I'll leave that in the description so you can check that out. Disregard my typos, but there's quite a lot of things in there, starting from my base calculations, my base stats, all that stuff. And I really tried to make it skew more in favor of Kikoru. To be honest with you, I was really trying to, because the goal of this video was to explain her value. But again, it doesn't. Why is the bottom of her hair green? What the hell? But anyway, it doesn't skew that way in most cases. So my conclusion is that I still think Kikoru, I still think it's unfair for her or anybody else to be compared to Hoshina. But I do think it's unfortunate her attack stat is as low as it is at 1174. She's only getting plus 500, right? And she's getting 50% here. I could bring it up a bit more, actually. So there's that. I mean, but it's not going to eclipse, what, 2,000 probably? Maybe like low 2,000s. That's nothing crazy. I don't think it comes close to these other characters that are like 24, 25 with their attack increase slot ones, right? Maybe it comes close. Anyway. But anyway, so long story short, she's not needed. And that's what we knew. We knew Kikoru wasn't needed because really nothing is needed except for Hoshina. But I will say there's value there, but it ultimately comes down to what you want to do. But regardless, Chester is king. Let me know in the comments what you guys think.